Welcome to Proven and Probable. I'm your host, Maurice Jackson. Today's show is specifically dedicated to investors that want to have a position in the most valuable resource in the world, water. Most investors in the natural resource space are not aware of the global challenges we face demographically regarding water and how to have a position in water rights. Here to discuss this very critical topic is the founder, president, and CEO of Waterfund LLC, Mr. Scott Rickards. Mr. Rickards, thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thanks, Maurice. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Mr. Rickards, your company, Waterfund LLC, is the preeminent name when it comes to water. For the listeners that have no background regarding the challenges of the global supply and demand for water, can you please provide a macro analysis?
Sure, and that's a great starting point, Maurice, for thinking about water. The number one thing that has mystified investors and analysts when it comes to the subject of water has been its value. What is it actually worth, and how do you measure that? So as an investment company, our starting point was to figure that out. What's a dollar value we can attach to a unit of water, and how can we do that in as many different places around the world as possible? And then once we establish that, how do we what's the best investment strategy that follows from those numbers? So the first thing we did was partner with IBM to create a financial index for water in hundreds of cities around the world. We know the value of water in London, in Singapore, in New York, in Miami. And what this tells us, and what the data has revealed, is that the cost of water almost everywhere exceeds the price or the tariff that's charged for it. So this is the fundamental issue facing investors. This has been the big barrier to private investment in water. It's been that for private investors, because it's a subsidized industry, it simply isn't that profitable. Now, in the countries and in places where the proper value is charged for the water, there's some tremendous opportunities to invest. And so our job at Waterfund is to find those and bring those to the market. So that's what we've been doing. As it turns out, there are some opportunities in the U.S., but primarily we've targeted actually industrial water and a lot of countries in the Middle East where we do get a very good price for water. So that's been our focus, but it's taken really a global search to come up with those answers so far. And so we're currently invested in a variety of water rights and water supply projects around the world where we think that price is right. So that's what we've been doing.
So in essence, you've more or less created what I would call a spot price for water. Is that correct in that assumption?
Correct. Now, water. You say the word spot. It's interesting because in the water world, it's similar to other commodities. The water we own is sold on long-term contracts. So we like to. It's one of the things any investor likes when they invest in water. And so to the extent there's a spot market, I can say that for a number of our assets there are some spot sales of water, but in general, like natural gas, for example, that's generally how our water offtake agreements are structured.
Okay. With that being said, can you share with the listeners the supply and demand fundamentals regarding water and discussing aquifers and just the depletion of reservoirs?
Sure. Well, the starting point for anyone is always that the volume of water in the world never changes. So whether it's in aquifers, oceans, clouds, rivers, lakes, wherever it is, in total it never changes on a global basis. So what's happened, and this is where the opportunities lie, is that in the population centers, so the major cities of the world, they have run out of their cheapest and nearest sources of water, clean water. So that's been the infrastructure challenge. It has been the water supply challenge. It has been how do those major cities that have grown from 1 million to 10 million in the last 20 years, how do they maintain a abundant supply of fresh water for that many people when all of the nearest sources have run out in a lot of cases? Sao Paulo is an example of that. Cairo is an example. Even a city like Detroit, which has plenty of water, they have old infrastructure. So in cases where the water supply is still abundant, you have a lot of aging cities that have infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So there are a lot of different challenges, but I'd say from a macro point of view, the number one starting point is that the major cities are really running out of those cheapest and nearest sources of water.
With that being said, since the cheapest sources of water per se are not available, what options are there for resolving that matter?
Well, that's where things get interesting, and that's where the investment opportunities lie. And that's exactly the question all investors should be asking themselves when it comes to water. The alternatives are everything from where it depends on your water supply situation wherever you are, of course. But if you're near an aquifer and that aquifer has been depleted, there's technology to recharge aquifers, and that's been tried in a lot of different places with some success. There's a lot of different desalination technology out there that's some of which has been around for decades, some of which is brand new and could potentially lower the cost of taking the salt out of water. So that's an area where Waterfund in particular has a number of investments. There are all kinds of new membranes out there that for water treatment that are other ways to take dirty water, which is increasingly what you have near our largest cities, to produce fresh water. So there are quite a number of technologies out there. The challenge, Maurice, is that these technologies are generally pretty expensive, and when you're dealing in what's generally regarded as a quasi-public good, you don't have the funding to go out and really try something new. So the city of Austin, Texas, for example, even though they're a leader in many ways in different water technologies, they just don't have the budget. A relatively well-funded city does not have the budget to go out and really try some cutting-edge technology. So that's been the problem in the water business. There are a lot of breakthroughs that are at our fingertips, but for lack of well-capitalized water utilities, they haven't really been tried in the mass market. And so I think the only thing that's going to change that will be a change in how water is priced and what companies and retail consumers pay for water. When that starts happening, you'll see a whole influx of new technology.
Yes, I can only imagine. Just listening to you so far, you've mentioned two cities germane to the United States and not even mentioning Flint. How about agriculture and discussing water droughts in California? What are the effects there as well?
Well, it's interesting. There was a really, at the height of the drought in California, which is now over, it looks like, or over for 2015, 2016. When they were in the midst of this major drought they've had for the past 4 years, they convened a desalination conference, and at that conference, all the leaders from around the world in that industry gathered and met with the governor and met with all the big municipalities in California, and everyone walked away from that event saying, despite the fact that California does have one major desal plant, they said they'll probably never do this again. And it's because in California there's so many regulations to get a desalination plant up and running. It can take up to a decade for a major new plant to come online. So I think on that front, California is not going to be a leader, unfortunately. But they are going the conservation route. The only problem with that is that conservation is necessary but not sufficient to solve the problem. And so that's going to be California's challenge. I can't predict the weather, so I don't know what's going to happen 3-4 years out, whether they're going to be in drought again or not. But for the time being, they've kind of escaped because of a strong El Nino, I think.
Well, but sticking with that theme with California specifically, agriculture, those farmers need to have water, and the cascading effect seems to be if you don't have water, I can see that there's going to be effect on food prices. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely. And actually, you've hit on one of the key ways to invest in water, and one of the ways that some of the smartest investors I know have been playing water has been in sort of food and beverage space in a variety of different ways. Investing in ag in the form of livestock or other very water intensive water intensive activities. That's where you can capture the value of water through virtual water, and that's another way to invest in the space. We prefer to do it directly, but there are a number of investors that are very bullish on water who will make those investments in the food, beverage, and agriculture spaces.
Okay. Now, reverse osmosis. Talk to listeners about that process and the pros and cons to that.
So in reverse osmosis, this is the technology that has been around the longest in terms of desalination technologies. You've got reverse osmosis, and you have distillation, flash distillation, which is the other major commercial form of desalination. And the places that are the driest use these two technologies the most. So reverse osmosis is a membrane where water is pushed at basically high velocity, and the salt basically stays on one side of the membrane, and the rest of the water goes through the other goes to the other side, and you're supposed to have fresh water at the end. In distillation, what you do is you basically steam the water, and the salt falls out that way. So there are two ways of doing it. They're both effective. They both cost more or less the same. And the Middle East is where those two technologies are the most widely used. I think it depends on the salinity and exactly where you are, but I'd say they're both equally effective. And in terms of our portfolio, we have both types of technologies. And again, these have been around for a while now. They were pioneered by the Israelis about 25, 30 years ago. And it's still the number one way to build large-scale desalination plants. There's a lot of new stuff out there. Nanotechnology is being explored with respect to desalination, but there's been no breakthrough yet that's been widely commercialized.
Wasn't there I believe it was a state, and I may be incorrect on this, but California, where the government or the citizens were opposing that process, more or less, the reverse osmosis, because the salt was going to kill saltwater fish. Am I correct?
You are correct, although California is incorrect that would be a result of desalination. It's really, making a salty ocean a little bit saltier is not going to have any major impact on fish populations, and it hasn't in the places where this is most widespread, i.e., the Persian Gulf. There's been no major impact from that salt being from that brine basically going back into the ocean. I mean, if you were to try a cup of brine from a desalination plant and drink it, it's very similar to the salinity you get in a normal saltwater ocean. So it's not really that's been over dramatized by environmentalists and others. It's really the impact is de minimis in my view, and again, we have assets that do exactly that, and it's not really a concern of ours in the places where we operate.
Well, thank you for giving us a good global perspective on water, on the supply and demand fundamentals for water. Before we delve into your company, Waterfund LLC, would you please share what are water rights?
So water rights, a water right is an entitlement to a particular source of generally fresh water supply, and the laws surrounding water rights differ everywhere you go. And in the U.S., for example, every state has its own has different laws with respect to how they define what a water right is. So in Texas, if you own the land, you own everything below the land, as we know from the oil oil sector, and same's true in water. If there's water below your land, you own that water. In Colorado, that's not the case. You have to. It's very complex. Where if you had an entitlement 130 years ago to that water, your right is senior to a right that came 30 years or 50 years after you. So it's just different everywhere you go. The places in the world where water rights are valued the highest and and there's actually significant private ownership of those water rights, it's where the legislation is the clearest. And so you'll find, as I said, in the United States, Texas is a good example of that. But around the world, Australia has by far the best water rights legislation, which actually allow you to trade the water rights. There's a marketplace for those rights. And another country, Chile, has a great framework for private ownership of water rights. So it's just an entitlement to a flow of water. Could be from the Colorado River. It could be from the Murray-Darling water basin in Australia. But in general, it's there's no universal definition as to what a water right is. So that makes it complicated, unfortunately.
No, truly appreciate the definition for it. Now, are water rights easy for investors to procure?
Water rights are not easy, and the reason is that as I said, there's so many different laws with respect to what a water right is, and what your entitlement is to that water, what you can do with that water. That it is not recommendable for a retail investor, or really any investor that's not an expert in this area, to just start trying to buy water rights. Again, eventually, the reason you buy a water right is either to develop it and turn it into a source of supply and sell the water, or to hold on to it for a long period of time and hope that its value goes up. I think that either strategy entails quite a bit of time, and so for an investor that is looking to earn a return in water, that's probably not the best way to do it in the short term. In the long term, it could prove to be a very good strategy, but it depends on what you're looking for in that kind of investment. The way we operate is we always like to attach a supply asset to that water right. So if we're buying water rights, we will only do it if there's a way to bring that water to to a buyer, to an off-taker who's going to purchase the water.
Okay, twofold question for you, if I may. Now, I realize that water rights aren't the crux of your business, but at what price is Waterfund LLC procuring water rights? And from a valuation standpoint, how much of a discount is that?
Well, there's no simple answer to that question. Water, the value of water differs, as we know from our index, everywhere you go. So in terms of at what value are we buying water, we always we follow our own data, which tells us exactly what the break-even price for water is in most major cities in the world. So for example, in New York, it's about 40. If you own a water right in Manhattan, which we don't, but if you did, 40 cents per cubic meter, which is the unit we use, is the break-even price for water. In a place like Singapore, it's $2.50 per cubic meter, just by way of comparison. For the water we own in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, our break-even price is about $5 per cubic meter. So again, Saudi Arabia 10 times what the water's worth in New York City, which makes sense. New York City's fed by the water-abundant Catskill Mountains, and Saudi Arabia is in the middle of a desert. So, just to give you sort of the relative value of water around the world, that's kind of just a few examples.
Okay. Now, at what locations does Waterfund LLC have water?
We own water primarily in very dry parts of the world, and right now our portfolio is mostly concentrated in the Middle East. And the reason for that is that that's where we can earn the highest price for water. So as investors, that's where we have allocated capital, and that's where most of our assets are. And most of it's in desalination. Mid-sized desalination plants in countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia. We've started investing in Africa. So places where there's really a supply-demand imbalance. We would like to invest more in the United States, and we view California as a great opportunity. But until a lot of the regulatory framework changes, it's not that investor friendly for people like us right now.
Well, strategically speaking, where you currently have your locations, it seems brilliant. Now, may I ask you this as well? Are there any reversionary interest for those locations, or are they 100% owned?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, we operate in countries where foreign ownership can be difficult sometimes. In our case, we do fully own our plants. All of our plants in that part of the world are wholly owned by Waterfund. Yeah, but we do rely on a number of different partners to operate the plants, and but in terms of ownership, we've been able to secure and get comfortable with basically foreign ownership in those countries.
Okay. Now, you've touched on it, but I'd like to just get a little bit deeper in depth, if we may. What is your company, Waterfund LLC, doing to address all of these global matters, and why is it imperative for investors to have a position in Waterfund LLC?
Well, I would say water in general is an asset in which in the 21st century everybody should have a position, and the reason is simply that if you look at commodities across the board, natural resources across the board, we're in a period of generally lower global growth, and in that environment, you're not going to have the big jumps in the price of oil or the price of copper or iron ore that we've been accustomed to. It's just, again, lower global growth is not going to lead to the kind of returns you've seen in other natural resources. Water's different, and that's exactly why everyone should have a position in water, because the demand for water doesn't fluctuate the way it does for iron ore. First of all, it's demand inelastic, and secondly, in a low growth environment, even if the world is growing 1% GDP growth a year, doesn't matter in water. Water is very population sensitive as opposed to growth sensitive, and that means there's still going to be huge demand for new infrastructure and new water supply assets for a very long time. And in Europe and the United States, we have very old infrastructure. There's no getting around the fact that that's going to need to be replaced, and it's going to take a lot of investor capital to do so. And in places like the developing world, Africa, India, etc., you've got new projects that need to be built to supply billions of people that need access to fresh water. So I'd say for those macro reasons, everyone should have some kind of position in water. The reality is that almost no one is invested in water today. Very few private investors are in water, and so I see a pretty significant gap there. And companies like mine, Waterfund, have developed retail level, accredited investor level products for to get access to these kinds of investments.
I completely concur with your statement there with the lack of investment per se right now in water. I speak specifically with natural resource investors all the time, and they're not even aware of the opportunity and potential and the stewardship of having water. So again, thank you for clarifying that. Now, for an investor, if they wanted to participate in Waterfund LLC, what's the criteria?
Currently, accredited investors can invest in any of our projects, and we actually have quite a broad platform that allows relatively affordable investment units to be purchased. For as little as $5,000, you can be an investor in one of our projects, and we've structured them in a way that we've really tried to make it as as easy as possible to get access to these kinds of projects. And our site, worldswaterfund.com, allows investors to open accounts and get started and see what kind of projects they'd like to have an allocation to.
Okay. Now, realizing that Waterfund, LLC only allows accredited investors to participate in the fund, are you able to share company financials, or must investors qualify before disclosure?
Good question. Investors have to an investor has to be accredited before we can proceed. Unfortunately, and that's the SEC's rule, not ours.
but we understand.
But yeah, no, I think you hit on a more important point, which is, at what point will there be a better product out there than, say, just the ETFs that allow you to invest in, GE and Siemens and other big companies? When is there going to be a pure kind of water product out there that really gives you the true return and true value of water? That has yet to be developed, and so we're working on it. Other people are working on it, but it's a challenge because water is not as simple as it sounds. But we've done as much as we can at this point to make water available to those investors.
Mr. Rickards, what makes you qualified for the task of leading Waterfund LLC?
Well, that's an interesting question. So prior to starting Waterfund, I worked for the Dubai government, which was an interesting job because Dubai has a sovereign fund, and they were invested in a whole bunch of things around the world, including natural resources. And so prior to starting Waterfund, my role was to seek out natural resource investments for a very water short government. And so I explored all kinds of things prior to starting Waterfund. I spent 2 weeks on a boat in Patagonia, buying what were effectively waterfalls, in the middle of nowhere, for a Middle Eastern government. And so that was my background going into this, and it has served me well in terms of developing the right kinds of projects for Waterfund.
Well, it sounds very interesting. That's a very colorful background there. In closing, Mr. Rickards, what is the best way for listeners to contact you and keep up with the latest exciting developments of Waterfund LLC?
Our site, worldswaterfund.com, has information on our projects, our investments, and contact information. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in water as an investment to visit the site, and you can open an account online with Waterfund.
Mr. Scott Rickards, thank you for joining us today on Proven and Probable.
Thank you, Maurice.
The information presented on Proven and Probable is provided for educational and informational purposes only, without any express or implied warranty of any kind, including warranties of accuracy, completeness, or fitness for any particular purpose. The information is not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice, or any other advice. You should not make any financial, investment, or trading decision based on any of the information presented without first undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional broker or competent financial advisor.